Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. The observant ones will have noticed in the program it says Tracy Massey. I'm not, obviously, Tracy Massey. Unfortunately, she's had some complications with her flights getting here from the US, so I'm going to step in for her and cover the Redefining Retail presentation this morning. I'm the President of Global Retail at NielsenIQ and also GfK, who we merged with a few months ago. So let's get into the presentation. I know the room is still moving around a little bit, but I think we'll get started in the interests of time. So there's three factors which have been prolific for retail in recent years: COVID, conflict, and cost of living. And although COVID is now very much in the rear-view mirror in terms of the pandemic phase, there are shopping habits which changed as a result of COVID, which still persist today. Conflict, obviously, unfortunately, continues in our world. You only have to turn on your TV screens every day to see evidence of that. And cost of living is derived from both of those factors in recent years. There are other factors as well, but cost of living is derived very much from those two implications. So perhaps it's not surprising when we did our NielsenIQ Insider survey earlier this year, which is a survey of senior-level retail executives across the world, 57% of senior leaders in retail stated that changes in consumer behavior was the most important topic in their boardrooms at the moment. Interestingly, this ranks above inflation, which came in the low 50s, and also omni-channel strategies. But if you think about the three C's that I talked about at the start, all of these things are very interlinked. They're very intertwined. None of them exist on their own. None of them exist in isolation. They're all intrinsically linked with one another. And of course, inflation, very much cost of living, which I talked about, and omni-channel very much came forward in the COVID crisis of 2020, 2021. So consumers have changed. Now, I myself am a retailer. I spent many years working in stores. I worked for two of the big four FMCG retailers in the UK, and I also have my own retail business. And I was sitting there the other day thinking about how retail has changed in the last decade or two. When I was a store manager, the store was the place. There was no other place. There was no online. There was no internet shopping or groceries. We were not going around the store picking orders like you see in the aisles of supermarkets today. We knew the customers on a personal level, to the point where, you know, the staff on the counters, the staff on the delicatessen would know if a customer wanted their ham sliced a bit thicker, or if a customer needed support with packing their bags at the checkouts. That's what it was like. It was that very much one-to-one interaction in the physical sense. There wasn't anything else. But why do I tell you this story? Well, the story's really about loyalty, because we used to see the same customers in the store week in, week out, sometimes multiple times during the week. The loyalty was there with us as a retailer. It would take a huge seismic event for one of those customers to go and shop somewhere else in the past. It also applies to brands. If you think about the way that the consumers used to select their brands, they would come in, they were very habitual in the way that they would select their brands and their products from the shelves. And of course, the shelf is very different today to what it was back then, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We had promotions back then, of course, not as sophisticated as today, but there were promotions on the gondola ends, in the dump bins, and on the aisles. But the consumers didn't switch brands the way they do today. They were not as quick to do that just because there may be a discount or some sort of saving on the other product. So they're also loyal to the brands. And that's something that's really shifted, because today, all of that loyalty is gone, or most of that loyalty has gone. Consumers will switch very quickly. They have access to much more information through the internet, through the devices, and through the media that they consume. So having pinpoint accuracy in terms of how you target your consumers is so much more important today than it was in the past. It's also more difficult today than it was in the past because of the proliferation of data. And we're all here talking about tech for retail. Of course, a lot of that data comes through the technology that we now use and consumers now adopt in their daily lives. So managing that data, managing that massive data overload is very important to be able to target the consumers that you need to get to. So let's go right back to the beginning. So to look at this and break it down a bit, I'm going to talk about the 4 Ps of marketing, which you'll all be very familiar with: place, product, price, and promotion. So place is disrupted. I've spoken about this. It's not just about the physical space anymore. It's about, yes, still about the store, but it's also about online. It's about the digital shelf as well as the physical shelf. The physical shelf has, of course, changed. There's less product on shelves these days than there used to be. Ranges have become more harmonized. We see evidence of this in our brand bank data at NielsenIQ, where we are producing content for products. There are fewer products today than there were before COVID. But also it's about the digital shelf. Place is now about the digital shelf. And the digital shelf is very different because consumers don't just shop the digital shelf by category. They can shop it, for example, by dietary requirement, if that's their choice, or some other filter that they may apply. So they're very different. Place has really changed. Now, product, I've talked about the shelf changing. Of course, that has a huge impact on product. There are fewer products on the shelves. The shelves are merchandised differently, and the digital shelf that I talked about. And then price and promotion. We see increasing polarization in terms of economics. We see the rich getting richer. We see the poor getting poorer. And, I'm very conscious at the moment. This is a hot topic in many countries as we head towards the winter. There's a lot of talk about, fuel poverty again. The EU are talking about that. Fuel poverty, for those of you that aren't aware, is consumers that have to spend more than 10% of their monthly disposable income on energy to heat and light their homes and so on. It has a real impact on the way people shop, and it drives significant changes in shopping behavior because people are forced in that direction. But there's another P here. There's a fifth P, which is people, because people, the consumers, have changed. And it's not just the consumers, it's also the staff in retail businesses as well that have changed. There's a requirement for more flexible working following COVID, and also there's AI and other technology coming into the workplace which affects the jobs of those people. So people, consumers, yes, and we'll focus mainly on that today, but for retail, obviously, there's another people aspect as well. So I'm going to go back to our NIQ Insider survey that I talked about on the first slide. So channel distribution strategy, every retailer has one of those. But it's not a nice to have, it's got to be a focus area because it continues to change significantly. And if you look at the responses here from the survey, and I'll start at the bottom actually and just talk through them. So there's a few retailers who are still interested in having an owned online platform. That's a platform where other third parties can come in and participate there, sell there alongside the parent retailer who owns the site. That's not as important, but it is still mentioned in the survey nonetheless. More presence online with more categories was also mentioned. Now, this is something that we saw a lot of, maybe 10 years ago, where there was this race to sell everything, get the most products in your store, get as many as you can, be competitive because you sell everything. There's less desire for that now because, the cost of supply chain is significant, warehousing isn't cheap, and actually the move now is more towards a very tailored range rather than trying to stock everything. So that comes in quite low, but it does still come up. More presence online with wider scale of distributions, more platforms. So this is about the retailers not just selling on their own website, but selling maybe on marketplaces, on social channels, in disruptive channels, because this is where the disruption is coming from. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but being involved in that. Traditional trade, obviously, really important. And of course, the holy grail is the synchronized omni-channel strategy coming in at 55%. Well, everyone wants that, don't they? If only it was that easy. So I'm going to just talk about disruptors, and I'll mention TikTok here. So this is some data from Fox Intelligence, which is an NIQ company. This is essentially electronic receipt scanning that produces this data. And we're looking here at the cosmetics category in the UK. Now, to put this into context, TikTok Shop, not easy to say, did not exist 2 years ago. Okay, it wasn't there 2 years ago. It now has, as of the most recent quarter, Q2 2023, it now has a 6% share of the UK cosmetics market. This is like a unicorn in retailing. It's incredible the way this has come about. So it's that disruptive element, that third-party platform that I talked about. A lot of retailers interested getting into that, which can really drive disruption and ultimately drive sales if done in the right way. Now, something to bear in mind here, we talked about omni-channel. So TikTok is not just online, because what you see here in this example is Maybelline actually featuring it in store as well. So it becomes an omni-channel strategy, highlighting the products in store at the retailer, but also driving people to TikTok to purchase them as well. And if you look at the number of users, I mean, everyone knows TikTok has got more than 1 billion users worldwide. But, you know, significant numbers in some countries there. And if you look at the UK, where obviously I've just showed you that market share in cosmetics, doesn't even appear as one of the countries with the highest number of users on TikTok. A lot of these users are Gen Z, as you would expect. This is, you know, the new consumer coming through. We talk a lot at both NIQ and GfK about how this consumer is different and how this consumer has different values, how they behave differently, how they shop differently. And this is a great example of you see it playing out before your eyes here. So, point to call out here in terms of the significance of that share, and you can see the TikTok share across the various months of the last couple of years there, but it's now in the top 5 merchants for cosmetics in the UK, alongside such big names as Amazon, Boots, Look Fantastic, and ASOS. This is pure disruption happening. This is an omni-channel strategy, disruptive, outside of the retailer's 4 walls, working really well and driving significant sales in the category. And there's another point to note about this as well, because it's not only effective, but it's actually producing better results than some of the traditional online channels in the UK as well. So if you look here at the average yearly online spend, actually in the standard channels across all cosmetics online, £60 a year, okay? That's the number that comes in. For TikTok, 50% higher at nearly £95 a year, with a higher average order value, £1 higher than the standard, and a much greater purchase frequency. But the interesting point is actually the chart on the right-hand side of the slide, where you see the TikTok shoppers' online spend on cosmetics by merchant. And you can see the gravity of that there, with 31% of their spend going into TikTok. Now, this is just one category, and we call this out because it's been successful, it's worked very well. There's a plethora of content on TikTok around beauty, and obviously millions and millions of views happening on those pages every day. But you can see the effectiveness of it when it works. And I actually saw a presentation. I was at a summit last year, and I saw a presentation from one of the major French beauty houses talking at the time about how they were using different channels to proliferate their strategy, and actually how they were using influence within those channels to really drive sales. This is definitely something that's been going on for a couple of years and delivering significant results. So the question that the beauty house was posing to other retailers in the room was, why don't you do something similar? Because there's evidence here that it genuinely works. I'll talk a little about people. Now, this is a chart from earlier this year, and it talks about the cost of living crisis primarily. Now, I am conscious that this is the most recent data we have on this because it's a survey of 11,000 consumers globally. The inflation numbers have come down a little bit since then, and hopefully things are looking a bit more promising than they were. But you can see the sentiment. I mean, 45% of global consumers expecting harder economic times in their country. 45% also feel they're spending more on groceries than they were previously. I mean, I think that's evidenced even now. And 67% expecting prices of goods and services in general to increase in the next 6 months. This was the outlook from March. As I say, it's probably tapered off a little bit since then, but nonetheless, this is the consumer sentiment. So what does this mean for consumers? I mean, how do they behave? So these are the strategies that consumers take to try and help their personal financial situation in times of cost of living difficulties. The evidence from our survey tells us that consumers will adopt normally around 4 of these strategies to help balance their books on a monthly basis. The top 3 here are shopping at different retailers. So I talked at the start about how there used to be more loyalty. Well, you can see obviously that's gone because they will literally move stores to a lower price store if that helps them. And they will also stop buying certain products. So again, I talked about the brand loyalty that used to exist in the past. Again, it proves that's gone. They will focus just on essentials if they need to, and they'll buy whatever brand is on promotion. So they're the top 3. I also want to draw your attention to the bottom one there at 21%, which is opting for private label or store brands, because we have seen a significant move towards this in the way that consumers shop, but also in the way that retailers behave. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. So interestingly, private labels are actually increasing price ahead of the market in the majority of categories. And if I just talk you through the bars that you see on the chart there. So this is the percentage of country and category combinations where private labels have increased their price faster than the overall category. So in Europe, for example, non-alcoholic beverages have increased their price faster than the category in 76% of cases. That's a big step. In North America, the highest one is ambient food at 69. In Latin America, it's pet food at 73. And in Asia Pacific, it's frozen food at 63%. So these are high numbers. You can see on the chart there, all of them are high. Now, this is actually great for consumers because they're getting value in the way they shop. It's helping them with their cost of living. But at the same time, for retailers, it's been a very effective method of passing on cost increases to consumers in a way that perhaps they haven't noticed as much. If they've transferred from a branded product into a private label product, they may not have even realized that the private label product has increased in price by as much as it has. And actually, just a few examples of retailers here who are doing, taking big steps in private labels. So the first one is Tesco in the UK. So Tesco doesn't just have one private label brand, it has 8 private label brands these days. And I'm not talking about things like, wheat alternatives or dairy alternatives. I'm talking about actual named brands. Things like, I'm trying to remember the name of it, it's gone out of my head, but Stockwell. So Stockwell & Co., which you can buy in Tesco in the UK, is a Tesco own label brand, but the consumer, in many cases, probably wouldn't even realize that. And they have 8 of these across the range, catering for different demographics, different pricing, and so on. It's a very sophisticated own label strategy to drive sales, and of course have different products within different segments of the market. Meadows in Hong Kong, you may be aware, Meadows have won nearly 200 awards now for their own label range. So these are not subpar, cheap products. These are innovative products which are, fulfilling the requirements and winning significant food awards globally. And of course, Costco in the US, but increasingly internationally, we see them in more markets of Europe, have their Kirkland brand, which is actually a brand that is well known to be made by the product manufacturers themselves. So companies like Grey Goose, for example, vodka, they produce the Kirkland equivalent of the vodka and so on. So it's a really interesting model, but again, very popular and significant sales. So private labels really developing and really growing in the market. So you saw from the slide before, 32% of consumers states they will buy whatever is on promotion. It's a bold statement, and I'm going to call out some facts on that now, just in terms of how significant promotional sales are across Europe. So on this slide, you can see the importance of sales units, that's volume, which are sold under promotion. The European average is 30%, so pretty high actually, and increasing by 1.3% year on year. The lowest country is Spain at 14%, and incredibly, the highest country, Czech Republic, at 64%. Can you imagine 64% of sales are in some way linked with a promotion? The numbers are significant. I mean, there's a lot of countries there ahead of that light blue bar where they are above the average for Europe. So you can see how these numbers are growing in the red and green at the bottom, or in some cases declining. But in the main, promotional sales are increasing. Now, talked about consumers buying anything that's on promotion and swapping their shopping needs around to buy the products that are promoted. It's not as simple as that. And I just want to call out a case study that we had at NielsenIQ with a company, a beer client actually, based in the UK. So they planned a price increase of 11%. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? I mean, these are not conversations that you would normally be having, but in recent times, they were literally sitting there around their table planning a price increase of 11% to cover their manufacturing costs, their supply chain, and so on. We did some predictive modeling with them, and we can tell you more about this on our booth, which is over at E63. If you want to come and see us today, we can talk about some of the solutions that we have within NielsenIQ. But we did some predictive modeling, and we have a lot of analytics, obviously based on the retail data within the market. We're gathering this every day, every week, every month. And the predictive modeling said that even if you move to that strategy where you increase your prices and you then go on a significant promotional strategy to effectively pull them back down in some cases, it's not going to work. It didn't play out in the modeling that we had for the market. Anyway, they were under pressure. They went ahead. They did it. And guess what? The model was about right. And it did. Actually, what happened in the market was pretty much what the model predicted. So it's not just a simple case of we can put our prices up, that's fine, we can promote products here and there, it'll work. with the proliferation of information that consumers have, it doesn't always work like that. And this is a great example of how, you have to get it right. It's a very complicated piece around price and promo these days. So we went back, we helped the client again, went back for another round, and they changed their strategy. So it's about healthy promotions. That's what it's about. It's simple to say and hard to do, but it's about healthy promotions. No one wants a return to the historical, wasteful sorts of trade promotions that we used to see. We used to see some retailers would take 10% off across everything in the store. Other retailers would then have to follow. It doesn't help margins. It doesn't support the industry. It doesn't even do that much for the consumer because they can go and buy the same product in multiple locations for the same price on promotion. So it's not really helping anyone. That's not where we need to go. It's about creating promotional strategies that don't devalue your brand to consumers and ultimately drive the business forward in the right way. And there's a number of points on this slide, which I won't read out, but you can get the gist of it. So, in summary, now's the time to take action. I've talked about place, where you activate and where you target sales has an impact on who you attract and how you grow. And we've seen the example of the disruptors and the difference that that's making in some markets. The product, we've talked about the changing shelf, the digital shelf. Every element around product strategy, whether it's portfolio, whether it's positioning, whether it's the packaging, whether it's the promotions, all massively important to attracting that consumer and keeping that consumer. Pricing promotion, incredibly complex. It's more complex now than it's ever been with the amount of data that we have in the market. Understanding that and being able to manage that on an ongoing basis is critical to success. And as I said, consumers remain at the forefront of leaders' thinking. We all have to get into their heads and understand how they're thinking if we can succeed as retailers. Thank you.